Her laughter rings out as she pours water over my pancakes, the same laugh I've heard too many times from my own daughter. Still, I don't flinch. As the cold liquid spreads across the table, the sting of her disrespect sinks deeper than the mess on my plate. While she continues to mock, I realize this isn't just a mistake, it's betrayal. That's when I decide my daughter's next meal will come with a bill. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The Grainhouse Cafe hummed the way it always did on Sundays, forks tapping on ceramic, the hiss of bacon on the flat top, the low murmur of conversations that blurred into a single warm hum. Marlene Waverly sat at the end of the booth, shoulders straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She had ordered blueberry pancakes and black coffee. Simple, quiet things that didn't demand attention. Across from her, Heather was in full performance mode. Her laughter was sharp and polished, the kind that made heads turn but not for the right reasons. She'd gathered two of her friends from the real estate office, both women with loud perfume and louder opinions. Riley, 20 and pale under the cafe's yellow lighting, sat beside her mother, twisting the paper napkin into a rope. "Can you believe they call this service?" Heather said, tossing her hair back. "I've been waiting for 5 minutes just for syrup." 5. She shot a look at the passing waitress, who offered a quick, apologetic smile before scurrying off. Heather leaned in conspiratorially. "I swear, Mom, people just don't take pride in their jobs anymore." Marlene smiled faintly, her eyes on the butter packet she was opening. "Maybe they're just tired," she said. Heather's friends exchanged glances. One snickered, another sipped her mimosa. Heather grinned, too brightly. "Oh, come on, Mom. Not everything's a sympathy story. Some people just slack off." Marlene didn't argue. She sliced her pancake into even quarters, the way she always had when Riley was a child. The sound of the knife against the plate was delicate, deliberate, and to Heather, infuriatingly calm. "So," Heather said, clinking her glass with her friends. "Riley got her paycheck yesterday. Guess how much?" "Go on, Mom, take a wild guess." Marlene kept cutting. "Whatever it was, I'm proud she's earning it." "Oh, you'd love it," Heather said, voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. "Minimum wage, isn't that inspiring?" The table laughed. Riley's face flushed. "Mom, please," Riley whispered. Heather waved her off, half laughing. "I'm kidding, relax. Everyone needs to start somewhere." Marlene's hand paused. She looked at her daughter. Not the woman she'd raised, but the woman sitting across from her like a stranger wearing a familiar smile. Something hollow pressed behind her ribs, but she swallowed it down and reached for her coffee. "Let's not ruin a nice morning," she said quietly. Heather leaned back, crossing her arms. "Nice morning? You call this dump nice?" She gestured at the diner walls, the mismatched mugs, the ceiling fan that ticked like an old metronome. "Mom, you need to get out more. It's like you're allergic to any kind of style." Marlene just dabbed her napkin against the condensation on her glass. Riley glanced between them, small and uncertain, as if trying to patch a hole too wide to mend. The waitress finally returned with a pitcher of water and a flustered apology. "Sorry for the wait, folks." Heather smiled sweetly. "Oh, it's fine," she said. "We were just dying of thirst." She turned to her mother, eyes sparkling with a mischief that never meant anything good. "Weren't we, Mom?" Before Marlene could answer, Heather lifted the pitcher and tipped it forward. A cold cascade spilled over Marlene's plate. Pancakes, syrup, butter, all drowned beneath a sudden gleaming flood. The sound was obscene in its casualness, a slap of water against ceramic. "Oops," Heather said, too quickly. Her friends burst into laughter. Riley froze, eyes wide. Marlene didn't move at first. The cafe noise dimmed, like someone had turned down the volume of the world. Drops clung to her blouse, slid down to the table. She looked at her plate, at the puddled mess of her breakfast, then at her daughter. Heather was still laughing, high, sharp, brittle. Marlene reached for a napkin, folded it once, and dabbed her mouth as if finishing a meal that had gone just fine. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look surprised. Just finished. Riley's voice cracked. "Mom!" But Marlene stood. She placed the napkin gently beside her cup, pushed her chair in, and reached for her purse. "Where are you going?" Heather called, still half laughing. Marlene met her gaze, steady, gray, unflinching. "To get something I've been meaning to have for a long time." Heather blinked. "What's that?" Marlene's smile was so faint it was almost kind. "A clear table." She walked out. The bell above the door jingled once, and the laughter that followed her sounded suddenly smaller, thinner, like it didn't know what joke it had just told. The next morning, Cedar Rapids wore its weekday face. Gray sky, wind sharp enough to make the flags outside the post office snap like reprimands. Marlene sat at her kitchen table, a single cup of coffee cooling beside an uneaten slice of toast. The table was clean now, spotless, the way she liked it. Not a water ring in sight. Her phone sat face up beside her mug. The contact list scrolled under her finger. Susan Reeds. Her thumb hesitated only long enough to let her heartbeat steady. Then she pressed call. The ring cut through the quiet. "Marlene?" Susan's voice was a gentle rasp, like a page turning. "I think I'm ready," Marlene said. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was recognition. The kind that comes from decades of friendship and knowing when a woman's tone has changed from complaint to conviction. "Then come by," Susan said. "I've already got coffee on." Susan's kitchen smelled like grounded comfort, dark roast and cinnamon. She'd been Marlene's neighbor once, before she'd sold her house and downsized to the same senior community Marlene had always said she'd never need. Now, Marlene looked around and saw something she hadn't recognized in a while. Freedom arranged neatly on open shelves. Susan pushed a steaming mug across the table and reached for a folder thick with papers. "You said you were ready. I took the liberty of digging out some old files." Marlene blinked. "You kept copies?" "I keep everything," Susan said with a small smile. "Especially when my best friend's daughter starts getting too comfortable with her mother's checkbook." Marlene's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. She pulled the folder closer. Inside were the things that told the story of her life in ink and signature. The deed to the house, bank statements, power of attorney documents, all with Heather's name beside hers like a shadow that had overstayed its welcome. Marlene traced the edge of one paper with her fingertip. "You ever notice how people say they love you while holding a pen that benefits them more than you?" Susan leaned back. "I notice. But I also notice when people stop pretending to." Marlene looked up, meeting her friend's eyes. "I want her out of my paperwork," she said quietly, "and out of my pantry." Susan didn't flinch. "Then that's what we'll do." The words landed heavy but solid, like stones building a foundation. Susan stood, moved to her cabinet, and pulled out a small, tidy stack of business cards held together with a rubber band. "There's someone you should see, Patrick Delaney, estate lawyer. Knows his way around families that confuse possession with love." Marlene accepted the card. The print was simple, black serif on cream stock. Patrick J. Delaney, attorney at law, Cornell Street office. She turned it over in her hand, the edges sharp against her fingers. "I've been meaning to call someone like him for a long time." Susan smiled, pouring another cup of coffee. "You mean you've been meaning to stop forgiving?" That earned her a small laugh. Short, tired, but real. Maybe so. They spent the next hour sorting through everything. Susan's method was clinical, efficient. Dates, signatures, account balances. Marlene's handwriting trembled only once, when she had to sign her own name beside Heather's for the last time before it would disappear from her future entirely. When they were done, Susan slid the folder back together and tapped it into a perfect stack. "You take this straight to Patrick tomorrow. He'll do the rest." Marlene closed the folder gently, like sealing a memory into a box. "You know what the strangest part is?" "What's that?" "I don't feel angry anymore. Just quiet." Susan studied her a moment, eyes soft but steady. "That quiet's power, honey. Don't confuse it with peace." Marlene nodded. She stood pulling her coat tight around her shoulders. At the doorway, she paused and turned back. "You always did know when to hand me the right paper. And you always knew when to finally sign it," Susan replied. Outside, the wind carried the scent of roasted beans and faint wood smoke. Marlene walked to her car, the folder hugged against her chest like something alive. Across the street, a man held the door open for a woman half his height, smiling in that polite Midwestern way. Automatic, restrained. She watched them a moment, then slid into her driver's seat. The folder sat in the passenger seat, seatbelt fastened around it like a companion. She took out her phone again. The home screen lit up with Heather's name under a missed call. Marlene stared at it, her thumb hovering. Then she swiped it away. The engine started with a low growl, steady and certain. She drove off toward Cornell Street, the folder gleaming faintly under the dashboard light, its edges sharp, its silence louder than anything Heather had ever said. The next morning, the air over Cornell Street felt clean, sharp with frost, quiet with purpose. Marlene parked in front of a narrow brick building with a brass plaque that read, "Patrick J. Delaney, Attorney at Law." The paint around the doorframe was chipping, but the glass shone spotless, reflecting the kind of discipline she admired. She sat for a moment before going in, her fingers resting on the manila folder in her lap. Her pulse beat steady. Not fast, not hesitant, just sure. For years she'd lived in small compromises, letting Heather handle bills, signing forms she didn't fully read, calling it help when it was control. But this morning wasn't about forgiveness or rebellion, it was about reclamation. Inside, the office smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. The receptionist, a young man with tidy hair and a courteous half-smile, gestured her toward a chair. "Mr. Delaney will be right with you, Mrs. Waverly." She sat down beside a fern that looked better cared for than some people she knew. The ticking of the clock filled the quiet. When the door opened, Patrick Delaney wasn't what she expected. Not gray-haired and severe, but calm, late 60s, with eyes that seemed to register everything before he spoke. His suit wasn't new, but it was precise. "Mrs. Waverly," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Susan mentioned you might come by." Marlene followed him into his office, a room lined with thick legal books and framed degrees. A single lamp cast a warm cone of light over his desk. He motioned for her to sit. "So," he said, opening the folder she handed him, "let's take a look at what you've got here." He flipped through the documents methodically. The deed, the accounts, the will, the power of attorney. His eyes moved quickly, lips pressed thin in thought. "You still own everything," he said finally. Marlene met his gaze. "Not for long. I'm moving forward, not backward." Something in her tone, steady but edged, made him nod. "Good. Then we'll start with the basics." He began drafting on his legal pad, the scratch of pen steady and certain. "Power of attorney will be revoked effective immediately. Heather's authority ends today." The words were plain, procedural, but to Marlene, they landed like a small miracle. "And the will?" she asked. "Rewritten," he said. "You'll retain full control of your estate. I'll help you set up a trust. Conditional. For your granddaughter Riley, correct?" Marlene's expression softened. She's the only one who still shows up just to talk. He nodded, understanding more than he asked. Good. Conditional trusts ensure accountability. We'll note visitation, education, or care provisions, whatever you decide. For the next hour, the office filled with quiet work. Signing, stamping, initialing. The sound of each page turning felt like a lock sliding into place, securing her life back where it belonged. When they reached the deed, Patrick paused. Now, this one's symbolic, he said, sliding it forward. Your house. Your name alone. Marlene's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. I bought that home when Heather was in kindergarten, she murmured. Every wall has her fingerprints. Patrick looked at her kindly. Then it's time those walls belong to you again. The signature came out clean, confident. She dotted the I in Waverly with precision, then exhaled as though something long coiled inside her had finally released. Patrick pressed his seal, signed his initials, and tucked the deed into a fresh folder. All filed today. I'll courier the confirmations by evening. You'll receive new keys, new titles, new everything. Thank you, she said, her voice quieter than she meant. For helping me untangle. He smiled faintly. You'd be surprised how many mothers come in here with that same word. Untangle. Marlene stood, gathering her coat. She hesitated near the door. Do they ever regret it? Patrick met her eyes evenly. Only the ones who waited too long. Back home, the house greeted her differently. The air felt cleaner somehow, lighter. She opened every window, let the chill in, and watched the curtains move like breaths finally exhaled. She laid the new folder on the counter, right where Heather's stack of unopened mail used to sit. Then she reached for her old brass keyring, pulled one key loose, the spare Heather had once kept, and dropped it in the trash. The new locks went on easily. The click of the deadbolt echoed through the quiet house like punctuation. In the living room, sunlight cut across the floorboards, revealing a faint water stain near the table leg, remnant of that cafe morning. Marlene knelt, wiped it once with a cloth, and smiled when it disappeared. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Heather. 2 missed calls. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped out onto the porch, letting the cold air sting her cheeks. Across the street, a delivery truck idled, its brakes sighing. She watched it pull away and whispered to herself, now it's just me. But as she turned to go back inside, something rustled at the edge of her yard. A folded envelope tucked beneath her doormat. No name. Just Mom written in Heather's handwriting, sharp and rushed. Marlene stared at it, her breath fogging in the air. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. By Thursday afternoon, the November wind had turned sharp enough to rattle the porch steps. Marlene was sitting at the kitchen table again. Same chair, same mug, same stillness, when the first knock came. Not a polite one. A hard, uneven pounding that made the coffee ripple in her cup. Then came the voice. What the hell, Mom? Heather. Marlene didn't move at first. She watched the sheer curtain tremble in the draft, listened to her daughter's footsteps stomping across the porch. The doorbell rang 3 times, too fast, too forceful. Marlene Waverly, Heather shouted. You think changing the locks is funny? Marlene rose, slow and deliberate. She crossed the hall, every step measured. The envelope still lay untouched on the counter. Mom, written across it in Heather's hurried scrawl. She'd left it there on purpose, like a test she didn't intend to grade. At the door, she rested her hand on the new brass deadbolt. Heather, she said through the wood. Her voice was calm, almost tired. Open this damn door, Heather yelled, kicking once. You're losing it. You can't just lock me out of my own house. Marlene turned the knob just enough for the latch to click, then opened the door an inch. A sliver of daylight caught her face, The rest stayed shadowed. "You don't live here anymore," she said. Heather froze for half a second, then laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "What are you talking about? You're acting crazy." Marlene's eyes stayed steady. "No," she said, her tone even and absolute. "I'm acting clear." The air between them thinned. Heather tried to wedge her hand through the crack, but Marlene's grip on the door didn't waver. "All the papers are filed," Marlene continued quietly. "The locks are changed. Your name isn't on anything that belongs to me." "You can't just erase me," Heather snapped. "You wouldn't have any of this without me helping you with the bills. Who kept the lights on when you—" "The lights are on now," Marlene interrupted. "You can see that." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The wind cut between them, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves and exhaust from the street. Heather's face twisted, confusion giving way to something rawer. Panic or pride, Marlene couldn't tell which. "You'll regret this," Heather spat. "I'll come back with someone who knows what you're doing." Marlene closed the door gently. Not a slam, just final. The new lock clicked like the period at the end of a sentence. Outside, Heather's voice rose, echoing off the quiet houses. "You can't do this to your own daughter." Then came the sound of retreating footsteps, gravel scattering as she stormed off. Marlene exhaled through her nose, steadying her breathing. The shaking didn't come, not like it used to. She stood for a long moment, one hand on the doorknob, before walking back to the kitchen. The silence that followed was thick, but not heavy. By the next morning, an envelope slid through the mail slot, this time with county letterhead. "Sheriff's Department, notice to vacate. Unauthorized resident, 10-day order." The language was sterile, but the meaning was clear. The law had caught up with Heather's tantrum. Susan arrived that afternoon, wearing her denim jacket and carrying 2 rolls of packing tape. "You sure you want to do this yourself?" she asked. Marlene shook her head. "No. That's why you're here." Together, they moved through the house, room by room. Heather's perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway closet. Her makeup bag sat on the dresser upstairs, a half-used lipstick resting like a relic of entitlement. Susan packed the items with quiet efficiency, labeling each box with a black marker: bedroom, bathroom, misc. When they reached the kitchen, Marlene paused at the pantry door. Rows of canned goods and neatly folded linens lined the shelves. "Out of my paperwork," she murmured, "and out of my pantry." Susan looked over. "What was that?" "Nothing," Marlene said. But her mouth curved into something small and certain. They stacked the boxes by the front door, 6 of them, each one a summary of Heather's occupation. Susan wiped her hands on her jeans and gave Marlene a long look. "Feels lighter in here already." Marlene nodded. "It does." As dusk fell, the porch light flicked on automatically, bathing the boxes in a soft amber glow. Marlene watched from the window as a gust of wind lifted one of Heather's scarves out of a half-open box. It twisted into the air, caught on the porch rail, and fluttered like a flag surrendering to gravity. Susan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You'll sleep easier tonight." Marlene's eyes stayed on the scarf. "Maybe. But I don't think she will." Outside, headlights slowed at the curb, a car idling, engine low. Marlene couldn't see who was inside through the glare on the glass, but she didn't need to. She knew the shape of that silence. Saturday arrived soft and cold. The morning light came thin through the blinds, catching the dust in slow suspension. Marlene had just finished sealing the last of Heather's boxes with packing tape when she heard a hesitant knock. 3 light taps. Polite, almost apologetic. She knew that rhythm. Riley never knocked like she belonged anywhere. Marlene wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Riley stood there clutching a plastic container. Her coat zipped too high, eyes darting like she wasn't sure whether to smile or cry. I, um, I brought cookies, she said. They're kind of burned, though. Burned cookies still count? Marlene replied, stepping aside. Come in before you freeze. Inside, Riley hesitated, her gaze falling on the stacked boxes by the front door. The Sharpie labels, bedroom, bathroom, misc, seemed to register all at once. She swallowed. Mom said you were overreacting. Marlene took a deep breath. And what do you think? Riley bit her lip. I don't know. She's been yelling a lot, posting stuff online. People at work saw it. She said you've lost it. Marlene's expression didn't change. I see. She motioned toward the kitchen table. Sit down, honey. They sat across from each other, the plate of cookies between them. Riley's hands fidgeted with the container lid until Marlene reached over and set it aside. You came here on your own, she said gently. That matters. Riley's eyes shimmered, defensive at first. I didn't want to pick sides. You didn't, Marlene said. You picked sense. For a moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked, slow and certain. Then Marlene reached into a folder sitting beside her and slid out a single document. I want you to see something. Riley leaned forward. Her grandmother's handwriting curled neatly beside a bold header, the Waverly Living Trust. Her own name appeared midway down the page. Riley blinked. So I'm still in this? If you show up like this, Marlene said, her voice low but warm. Yes. The words hit with the quiet force of something sacred. Riley pressed her hand over her mouth, a laugh breaking through a sob. I thought you were done with us. With me. Marlene shook her head. I'm done with being disrespected. Not with being family. Riley's composure broke completely. She stood, came around the table and folded herself into Marlene's arms. It wasn't the quick, awkward kind of hug they'd traded for years. It was desperate, clinging, full of apology and recognition. Marlene held her tight, feeling the shape of her granddaughter's shaking shoulders. When Riley finally pulled back, her cheeks were damp. She's not going to take this well. She already hasn't, Marlene said softly. And that's her problem now. The girl managed a small, crooked smile. You sound like Grandma Susan. Good, Marlene said. She's rubbing off. That afternoon, Susan stopped by again, clipboard in hand, practical as ever. Utilities need to be shifted under your name only, she said, settling at the table. I'll file the requests and redirect your mail to Brookwood Commons. You'll want everything centralized once you move. Marlene nodded. I trust you. You always say that, Susan teased lightly, but I like hearing it. Riley helped stack the envelopes, curious about the new address. Brookwood, that's the senior apartments near the park, right? Marlene smiled faintly. That's the one. Quiet, safe, good coffee next door. Riley tilted her head. You're really doing this? Like, starting over? Yes, Marlene said, starting over where no one mistakes kindness for weakness. Susan reached over, gave her hand a squeeze, then began writing out the final utility forms. The sound of pen on paper filled the kitchen, the official hum of life, rearranging itself. By evening, Riley had gone, promising to visit the next day. Marlene stood at the window, watching her granddaughter's small car pull away into the gold-gray dusk. The street was empty again except for the boxes waiting for pickup and the cold wind curling against the porch rail. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a notification. She didn't need to open it to know where it came from. Heather's posts had started trickling in all afternoon. Elders are losing it these days. Sad to watch. Some people rewrite family like it's a grocery list. Marlene didn't respond. She just turned the phone face down, the screen going black. For a moment she thought of Riley's arms around her, of the quiet strength that hug had given back. Then she looked around her half-packed kitchen, its edges soft in the lamplight, and realized the house finally sounded like it belonged to one person again. By midweek, Cedar Rapids was sunk in its late November lull, gray clouds low, sidewalks damp, and the hum of holiday preparation already humming in storefront windows. Marlene sat at her kitchen table, now half empty of her life, when the email pinged into her inbox. Subject: Heather's birthday dinner, RSVP by Thursday. Venue: Bistro 39. She stared at the invitation for a long time. The font was polished, the tone cheerful. Heather's kind of performance, even in digital form. Hosted by Heather Waverly, it read, as if she were the only Waverly left to claim the name. Below the polite invitation link, a short note was added. All family welcome. Bring whoever still knows how to behave. Marlene's mouth twitched at that. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. She moved her cursor to the RSVP dropdown and clicked attending. No comment. No hesitation. The confirmation screen flashed once, then disappeared. The act was simple. The intent, anything but. Her phone buzzed 5 minutes later. Riley. Riley. Mom said she sent you that invite. You're not actually going, right? Marlene, I replied. Riley. Grandma. You sure? That'll be a scene. Marlene. Then it'll be the last one she ever stars in. Riley. What does that mean? Marlene. It means I want her to have the last word she'll ever forget. Riley didn't text back for a long time. When she finally did, it was only a single heart emoji, half worry, half faith. Marlene set the phone down and looked around her quiet kitchen. The boxes were gone now. Susan had helped send them to storage. The pantry shelves looked bare, stripped of everything unnecessary. Freedom always had a sparse look before it bloomed. That afternoon, she called Patrick Delaney. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Waverly, everything settled on the deed and utilities? Yes, she said. I need one more document. There was a pause. He must have heard something in her tone. What kind of document? The kind that costs less than dignity but more than pride, she said softly. An invoice. Detailed. You already have the records. Utilities, rent, expenses, back payments she never made good on. He didn't ask why. Understood? He said. I'll draft it. Anything else? Yes, Marlene replied. Make it gift-sized. Patrick let out a quiet chuckle. Elegant as always, Mrs. Waverly. Just accurate, she said. The next day, Marlene visited Brookwood Commons. Her future apartment sat on the second floor, sunlight spilling through tall windows. She hadn't moved in yet. She was easing herself into it, the way people test cold water before a swim. The hallway still smelled faintly of new paint and floor wax. In the small craft shop near the lobby, she found what she was looking for, a cream-colored gift box with a ribbon the shade of autumn wine. The clerk offered tissue paper, but Marlene shook her head. No, she said. It's better when it folds clean. Back home, she laid the box on the table and waited for Patrick's courier. He arrived just before sunset, gray overcoat, polite nod. From Mr. Delaney, he said, handing her a sealed envelope. She signed for it, closed the door, and sat for a moment in the warm hush that followed. Her fingers worked carefully, peeling the seal open without tearing the edge. Inside was a single sheet, legal letterhead, fine print, numbers aligned in tidy columns. Every penny, every unpaid cost, every insult accounted for. It wasn't just an invoice, it was a mirror. She refolded the paper, smoothing the crease with her palm. Then she placed it neatly inside the gift box, tied the ribbon once, and adjusted the bow until it sat perfectly centered. Her phone buzzed again. Riley, this time calling. Grandma, are you really going? Riley asked, her voice tight. Yes, Marlene said, gaze fixed on the box. And I'm bringing her a gift. Something she can't return. Riley was silent for a long time. Just Be careful, okay? I always am, Marlene said. Then quieter. That's what she never understood. When the call ended, Marlene carried the box to the counter, where the evening light caught the ribbon and made it glimmer faintly red, like a warning and a promise at once. She poured herself tea, set it beside the box, and watched the steam curl upward, fading into nothing. Outside, the wind pressed against the house, whispering against the windows like it was trying to listen in. Bistro 39 gleamed like a glass ornament under the city's soft winter lights, amber chandeliers glinting off polished wine glasses, servers gliding in crisp black uniforms, a pianist threading faint jazz through the air. Every table hummed with chatter, but none louder than the one in the center, where Heather Waverly held court. She was radiant in a scarlet dress that drew every eye, her laughter carried above the music, big, performative, the kind meant to prove she'd already won whatever game she was playing. Around her sat her co-workers, their partners, Riley, and one empty chair that nobody seemed eager to claim. "Let's raise a glass," Heather announced, lifting her champagne flute. "To fresh starts, clean slates, and people finally knowing their place." Laughter rippled unevenly through the group. Riley shifted in her seat, her hands tight around her water glass. Then the door at the far end of the dining room opened, and every conversation within 3 tables dimmed. Marlene stepped in. Her gray coat was plain, her hair swept neatly back, her makeup minimal. She didn't pause to survey the crowd or seek anyone's approval. She simply walked forward, small leather purse over one arm, a cream-colored box tied with burgundy ribbon resting gently in her hands. Heather saw her first. The smile that crossed her face was sugar-laced venom. "Well, look who showed up," she called, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I was beginning to think you'd RSVP'd just to haunt me." A few people laughed, unsure if they were supposed to. Heather added, "Careful with the water, folks. We don't want any accidents tonight." Riley's head dropped. Marlene stopped at the table, met her daughter's smirk with a stillness that made the air between them shift. Then, without a word, she placed the box on the table in front of the empty chair and pulled it out for herself. The scrape of wood against the floor seemed louder than the pianist's melody. "Mother," Heather said, leaning back with exaggerated poise, "you really didn't have to come. It's a little formal for you, isn't it?" Marlene unfolded her napkin, set it across her lap, and looked up evenly. "Formality never goes out of style." That silenced a few chuckles. The waiter appeared, taking orders with polite confusion. Marlene asked only for tea. The dinner dragged itself forward on brittle laughter and glances. Heather was relentless, talking too loudly, toasting herself twice, dropping small barbs masked as jokes. Her friends humored her. Riley stayed quiet, glancing at her grandmother whenever Heather's tone sharpened. By the time dessert arrived, the gifts began. Heather leaned forward, practically glowing as each one was handed to her. Perfume from a co-worker, a framed photo from Riley, a gift card from her office manager. Compliments came easy, gratitude came rehearsed. Then Marlene slid the cream-colored box across the table. "This one's from me," she said simply. Heather's eyebrows arched. "Oh? A peace offering?" "Something like that." Phones discreetly came out to record. The audience loved this kind of theater. Heather untied the ribbon slowly, making a show of it. The bow slipped loose with a whisper. Inside was only a folded sheet of paper, cream stock, no decoration. "What's this?" Heather laughed, glancing around. "Another handwritten card from the past? Let's see what Mom's cooked up." She opened it. The laughter stopped. Her smile faltered, the color draining from her face as her eyes skimmed the lines. The legal header, the ledgered numbers, the signature of Patrick J. Delaney. Marlene didn't move, didn't blink. The room seemed to tilt toward the silence spreading from that single piece of paper. Heather's voice came out thin. "You've got to be kidding me." She looked up, eyes wild with disbelief. "You're invoicing your own daughter?" Marlene lifted her teacup, her hand steady. "Just settling accounts. You always said I owed you something." Gasps. A few nervous laughs. Nobody sure whether to be scandalized or impressed. Heather's jaw tightened, and she tried to laugh again, but it cracked halfway. "This is sick, Mom," Riley whispered. "Mom, please." But Heather cut her off. "Do you hear this?" She barked to the table. "She's senile. She's humiliating me in front of everyone." Marlene set her cup down softly. "I told you, Heather. I don't do humiliation. I do closure." That line landed like a stone in still water. No one spoke for several seconds. The pianist stopped playing. Heather's hand shook as she crumpled the paper, her manicured nails digging into it. "You've lost your mind." Marlene rose from her chair, calm and deliberate. "No," she said. "I've finally found it." She looked at Riley, gave her a faint nod, and turned toward the exit. Heather's voice chased her. "You think this makes you the hero? Everyone here sees what you are." Marlene stopped at the doorway and turned just slightly. Her silhouette outlined in the restaurant's golden light. "I know what I am," she said. "Free." The crumpled paper sat in Heather's shaking hands, creased and torn where her nails had dug in. Around her, Bistro 39 buzzed with low, stunned whispers. Even the pianist had stopped pretending to play. Riley sat motionless, her fingers pressed against her lips. A half-finished glass of red wine glowed like a wound under the chandelier. Heather straightened the page with jerky movements, smoothing it flat against the linen tablecloth. The black legal text glared back at her in sharp serif lines. Outstanding balances rendered. Unpaid rent for residents, 2018-2024. Utilities charged to joint accounts. Medical expenses and associated tax penalties. Total amount due, 23,180 $23,180 USD. Remittance, payable upon receipt or subject to civil action. At the bottom, beneath Patrick J. Delaney's signature, was a seal, Marlene R. Waverly, estate holder. Heather laughed once. It came out wrong, too loud, too high. "Oh my God," she said, scanning the faces at the table. "You're all seeing this, right? It's a joke. It has to be." No one laughed with her. Marlene, still standing near the exit, turned just enough that her voice carried. "You laughed last time," she said evenly. "I thought you'd enjoy the encore." The words hung there, slow and deliberate. A few diners at neighboring tables traded uncertain looks. Nobody's sure whether to pretend this wasn't happening. Heather pushed back from her chair. The legs screeched against the marble floor. "You think this makes you powerful? You're humiliating yourself. Mother?" Marlene walked back 2 steps, calm as gravity. "You humiliated yourself when you poured water over my food." Her tone was cool, measured, each word landing with surgical precision. "This is just the bill for cleanup." The manager approached hesitantly, hands folded. "Ladies, is everything—" Heather rounded on him. "Do not interrupt me." He froze, lips pressed thin, then backed away as a waiter slid into the space behind him, holding the checkbook awkwardly. "Will this be one check?" the server asked softly. "Or separate?" The silence broke like glass. Heather's mouth opened, but no words came. Marlene's gaze moved to the young waiter, then back to her daughter. She reached for her purse, drew out her wallet, and set down a single folded 20 beside her teacup. "This one's yours," she said to Heather. Her voice calm but edged with finality. "Happy birthday." The table erupted, not with laughter, but with a low buzz of disbelief. Phones that had been recording were lowered. A few of Heather's friends muttered excuses and stood, pretending to take calls. Heather looked down at the check, then at the invoice still trembling in her hand. Her face had gone blotchy, pink spreading to red. "You're sick," she whispered. "You need help." Marlene gathered her coat, slipping it over her shoulders. "I did get help," she said. "A lawyer." Riley reached for her mother's arm. "Mom, stop, please." Heather shook her off. "You think she's right? You think this is normal?" Riley didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. Marlene turned toward her granddaughter. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said softly. Then to Heather, "If you plan to contest, you'll find the contact details on the bottom." Heather's hand slammed the table. "You can't do this." But Marlene was already walking away, the quiet rhythm of her steps swallowed by murmurs and the faint clink of silverware returning to motion. At the doorway, she paused, one hand on the frame, and looked back. Not at Heather, but at Riley. The girl was watching her with an expression that carried both grief and relief. Marlene gave her the smallest nod, then left. For several seconds, the only sound was Heather's ragged breathing. Then she crumpled the invoice again, threw it onto her untouched dessert, and forced out a brittle laugh that fooled no one. "Guess that's what passes for gratitude these days," she muttered, eyes glassy. The waiter returned quietly. "Would you like to handle the bill, ma'am?" Heather stared at him blankly. He hesitated. "Or should I bring separate checks?" Riley stood, her chair scraping back. "Bring hers," she said, nodding at her mother. "She can afford it." Heather's mouth fell open as Riley walked past her, following the same path Marlene had taken toward the glowing exit sign. The moment Riley disappeared through the restaurant doors, something in Heather snapped. The laughter she'd been faking collapsed into a sound too sharp, too human. She stood up so fast her chair toppled backward and hit the floor with a clatter that drew every eye in Bistro 39. "She's crazy!" she shouted, her voice slicing through the low jazz. "Do you people hear me? That old bat has lost her damn mind." The pianist stopped mid-note. Silverware froze halfway to mouths. All across the dining room, quiet conversations fell into still, expectant silence. Heather's face was blotched pink and furious under the chandelier's glow. She jabbed the crumpled invoice toward a nearby couple as if it were evidence of a crime. "She's accusing me, her own daughter, of stealing, of abuse." Her co-workers tried to hush her, murmuring her name, but Heather only grew louder. "She needs a doctor, not a lawyer. Everyone knows she's been slipping for years." At the corner table, Marlene hadn't left after all. She sat by the window, a small bowl of soup before her, calm as a portrait in the storm. She'd moved there quietly after paying the check. Quietly enough that Heather hadn't noticed. The manager appeared again, this time with two hosts behind him. His voice was steady but firm. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. You're disturbing other guests." Heather wheeled on him. "Disturbing? She humiliated me in front of half this town, and you want me to—" "Please," the manager said, raising a hand. "Let's take this outside." "I'm not going anywhere," she snapped, eyes wild. "She thinks she can ruin me with a piece of paper." A glass shattered somewhere near the bar. A waiter had flinched. The entire restaurant held its breath. Marlene lifted her spoon, tasted her soup, and set it down again with quiet precision. When she spoke, it wasn't to Heather. It was to the manager. "She's not well. Please be gentle." That simple statement seemed to land harder than any accusation. Heather's mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a gasp that sounded like betrayal. Security arrived moments later, two calm, broad-shouldered men in dark polos. One spoke softly to Heather, the other stood ready, hands clasped. "Ma'am, we can escort you to your car." "You'll regret this," Heather shouted, her voice cracking. "Every one of you. I'll call my lawyer, I'll call—" "Your lawyer's name is on that document," Marlene said quietly. The entire room seemed to tilt toward her. For a moment, the fury on Heather's face faltered into disbelief, then into something close to fear. The guard stepped forward, gentle but insistent. Heather's protest shrank to a mutter as they guided her toward the door, her heels scraping against the floor, her pride dragging behind her like a torn hem. When the door closed behind them, the restaurant exhaled. Soft murmurs rose again. The pianist resumed, tentative at first, then steady. The air began to move. Marlene signaled the waiter and asked for her check. "Just the soup and the tea," she said. The young man nodded quickly, trying not to stare. She signed the bill in a firm, elegant hand and left a generous tip. Grace paid forward, even in the ruins of family theater. As she reached for her coat, Riley reappeared at the doorway, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Grandma," she whispered. "I saw them take her outside." "I know," Marlene said. "Sit down a second." Riley slid into the chair across from her, eyes wide. "You didn't flinch once. Not when she screamed. Not even when they—" Marlene folded her receipt and slipped it into her purse. "I've already flinched enough for one lifetime," she said. Riley looked toward the window where a faint smear on the glass showed Heather's reflection disappearing into the streetlights. "What happens now?" Marlene stood, smoothing her coat. "That was the last meal she eats with me." They stepped into the night together. The street smelled of snow and gasoline, the kind of cold that made silence ring. Behind them, Bistro 39 glowed soft and golden, like a memory already fading. 2 mornings after the incident at Bistro 39, a quiet hum filled Patrick Delaney's office. The old printer in the corner spat out pages with slow authority, the kind that marked the difference between gossip and documentation. The top sheet bore a heading in thick black font: "Notice of lien and civil restitution claim." Patrick slid the packet into a manila envelope, sealed it, and placed it in the outgoing tray. Beside it lay a small yellow note in his handwriting: "Filed per request of client. Execute immediately." When the courier left, the lawyer took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. The sky hung low over Cedar Rapids, heavy and gray, the kind that promised sleet by evening. He thought briefly of Marlene Waverly, the steady voice, the unflinching eyes, and allowed himself the faintest smile. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it arrived on letterhead. Heather found the envelope 2 days later, pressed into her hands by a uniformed courier at her workplace. Her office, a narrow real estate suite with fake ferns and motivational posters, suddenly felt smaller. She tore it open. The word "civil lion" jumped out in legal boldness. Line by line, her confidence drained away. Outstanding housing costs, misused funds, restitution for elder financial exploitation. The total matched the same merciless figure that had humiliated her in public: $23,280. But now it wasn't just a stunt. It was enforceable. Her phone slipped in her hand as she dialed. Come on, pick up," she muttered. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Blocked. "Mom, you can't do this to me," she shouted at the screen, though the line had already cut off. The office door creaked open. One of her coworkers peeked in. "Heather? Everything okay?" She forced a brittle laugh. "Fine, just family stuff." But her voice wobbled on family. When the door closed, she slumped forward, the document still trembling in her hands. Outside, sleet began to tap against the glass, the sound sharp as coins hitting a countertop. At Brookwood Commons, Marlene's apartment smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. A single vase of chrysanthemums brightened the kitchen counter. She was unpacking her last box: linens, old photographs, and one porcelain sugar jar she'd kept from the house, when a knock came. Susan Reed stood in the doorway, cheeks red from the cold, holding another bouquet. "White roses," she said, stepping in. Fresh from the florist on Fifth? They're beautiful, Marlene said, setting them beside the chrysanthemums. Susan gave her a knowing look. You sleep better now? Marlene poured 2 cups of coffee and passed one over. I don't flinch when someone opens a picture anymore. That earned a dry laugh from Susan. That's progress. They sat at the small round table by the window, steam curling between them. Outside, the courtyard trees were bare, their branches trembling against the wind. For a long while they didn't speak. They didn't have to. Later that afternoon, a knock at the door brought a different kind of visitor. Riley, bundled in a thick coat, cheeks pink. She was holding an envelope, not quite as official as the ones Heather received. I wanted to show you, she said shyly, handing it over. Inside were printed forms, verification of volunteer hours from a local literacy program. They said they'll sign off for December too, Riley added. You said I needed 50 to stay in the trust. Marlene's lips softened into a proud smile. And you've already earned 35. Riley nodded, looking around the cozy apartment. It's smaller than the house, but it feels calmer. It is, Marlene said. Everything fits here, even the quiet. They spent the rest of the visit sipping cocoa and watching the sleet thicken into snow. When Riley left, Marlene stood by the window, watching her granddaughter's car pull away, taillights glowing red in the dusk. On the counter, her phone buzzed with a new voicemail notification. She didn't need to listen to know who it was from. She pressed delete without playing it. Across town, Heather sat in her car outside her apartment complex, the lean notice open on the passenger seat, her reflection ghosted against the window. Lips moving, but no words left to defend herself. At Brookwood, Marlene closed her curtains and turned on a small lamp. The roses cast long, soft shadows against the wall. She breathed in, slow and deep, the scent of clean paper and fresh coffee, replacing the bitterness of memory. The first blow didn't come from a lawyer. It came from Heather's thumbs. By Friday morning, her social feed was awake before she was, notifications spilling like broken glass across the screen. The first post had gone up overnight. Some people get old and cruel. They call it justice. But it's just loneliness wearing legal paper. Family doesn't deserve lawsuits. It was tagged Tosh Elder Abuse Awareness and paired with a filtered photo of Heather staring pensively out her car window, one hand against the glass. Within hours, there were comments from coworkers, old clients, and mutual acquaintances. So sorry you're going through this, Heather. You've been such a great daughter. Stay strong. People lose touch with reality as they age. Don't let it break you. The validation came fast and shallow, like applause in an empty theater. She clung to it anyway. By noon, she posted again. You spend your life helping someone and they thank you with court papers. Maybe some people are just born bitter. Across town, Marlene's phone buzzed 3 times with new notifications. She didn't open them. The sound was enough to tell her the storm had shifted online. She set the phone face down on the counter and poured herself another cup of coffee. Susan arrived not long after, wearing her usual denim jacket, hair frizzed from the cold. You've seen it? She asked. Marlene nodded once. She's throwing stones at windows she already broke. You want me to handle a takedown? Susan offered. My nephew can scrub posts faster than... No, Marlene said, her tone mild but final. Let her talk. She needs the noise. They sat in the sunlit common area at Brookwood, where the heater hummed quietly. A few of the other residents passed by, nodding politely. If any of them had seen the posts, they didn't show it. But by evening, that courtesy would fade. Because Patrick Delaney's team didn't operate on emotion, they operated on documentation. At exactly 5:42 p.m., the law office's verified Facebook page published a public filing summary, captioned only, Legal Notice, Lien and Restitution Order, Cedar County Court. Public record available upon request. Attached beneath it was a scanned copy of the summary page, Heather's name, the docket number, and the amount, 23,780 Ashaquires. No commentary, no embellishment, just truth. The reaction was instant. The same commenters who'd championed Heather a few hours earlier began to disappear. Or worse, reply with carefully worded confusion. Wait, this is real? Thought it was just family drama. Kinda changes the story, huh? By Saturday morning, the algorithm had done its work. Local gossip pages picked it up, adding a headline Heather couldn't scrub. Real estate agent sued for elder financial misuse. Marlene didn't have to share it. The town did that for her. Riley called that afternoon, voice caught between pride and discomfort. Grandma, did you see what's happening? Everyone's talking about Mom. Even my friends at work. I figured they would, Marlene said, calm as ever. You didn't say anything back? Not even a comment? Marlene glanced out her window at the courtyard where snowflakes drifted slow and clean. Some things echo better in silence, she said. Noise burns out fast. Silence lingers. Riley hesitated, then said softly, You always know how to make it sound like you planned everything. I didn't plan her reaction, Marlene replied. Just the truth. Sunday morning came with clear skies and a strange lightness. Marlene dressed in a soft navy sweater and the same gray coat she'd worn to Bistro 39. As she brushed her hair, her phone buzzed again. This time not with outrage, but an email from her church secretary. Dear Mrs. Waverly, we'd love to see you back for service this week. Your seat will be waiting. She stared at the message for a long moment, her throat tightening unexpectedly. The last time she'd walked through those doors, Heather had still been sitting beside her, whispering critiques during hymns. Now, Marlene smiled faintly. I think I'll go, she murmured to herself. At Brookwood's small chapel that evening, the light through the stained glass hit her face in fractured color, blue and gold, soft and clean. She sat near the back, unseen, while the choir hummed through an old, familiar hymn. From somewhere behind her, a resident whispered to another, That's the woman from the paper, isn't it? The one who— Yes, someone else said quietly. That's her. Marlene closed her eyes. The music rose. The whispers faded. Brookwood Commons smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee that had sat a few minutes too long on the warmer. The community hall wasn't large, just a carpeted room with folding chairs and a low stage. But that morning it felt like something bigger. 30 residents sat scattered across the rows, murmuring to each other in that low, cautious tone people use when they know gossip has already arrived before the person it's about. At the front of the room, Susan Reeds was adjusting the microphone stand. You sure about this? She asked quietly, her voice thick with concern. Marlene, standing off to the side, smoothed the hem of her cardigan. I've spent 72 years letting other people do the talking, she said. Seems I'm due my turn. The murmurs dimmed as she stepped forward. The microphone squealed once, then settled into a steady hum. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. Good morning, she began, her voice carrying with the kind of calm that made people lean in rather than pull back. I was asked to say a few words about— She paused, smiling faintly. About boundaries. A few polite chuckles fluttered through the crowd. She let them fade before continuing. Most of my life, I thought kindness meant patience. I thought silence was peace. Turns out, both can become cages if you're not careful. The room grew still. Even the hum of the heater seemed to soften. I learned, she said, her tone deepening, that boundaries are not cruelty. They're clarity. They tell people where you end and where they don't get to trample anymore. Susan, sitting near the front now, pressed a tissue to her eyes. I had to teach that lesson to my own daughter, Marlene went on. And before you judge me for saying that out loud, trust me, I already did my share of judging myself. But here's the thing about guilt. It's like mold. It grows best in the dark. So I brought mine into the light. A few heads nodded. One man in the second row whispered, "Amen," without meaning to. Marlene smiled softly. When people take advantage of your love, they count on you staying quiet. They count on you caring too much about how it looks to stand up for yourself. Well, she glanced toward Susan, whose eyes shone. I stopped caring about how it looks. Applause began, hesitant at first, then gathering strength, rolling through the room like a slow wave of thunder. When it faded, Marlene added, "If I've learned anything, it's that peace isn't polite. It's earned. And sometimes earning it means signing your name to something that breaks your own heart." Susan openly wept now, smiling through it. After the event, people clustered around Marlene, shaking her hand, thanking her, calling her brave. Someone snapped a photo for the community bulletin. By the next day, it had traveled farther than anyone expected. A local reporter from the Cedar Rapids Chronicle called for an interview. The following Sunday, the front page headline read, "Woman claims respect, not revenge." After public humiliation and a family legal dispute, 72-year-old Marlene Waverly reminds her community that boundaries can be an act of grace. The article spread through town like wildfire. Even people who'd whispered judgment before were now repeating her words. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity. Like scripture. That evening, Riley called. Her voice trembled but carried pride. "Grandma, I read it. You're on the front page." Marlene laughed softly. That must have made Heather furious. "Maybe," Riley said. "But I don't care. I'm proud of you." Marlene paused, her throat tightening. "That," she said quietly, "means more than anything they took." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't the old kind, the kind filled with guilt and misunderstanding. It was the new kind, steady and mutual. When the call ended, Marlene sat at her small desk, pulled out her folder of documents, and opened the latest draft of her will. She picked up her pen, flipped to the executor section, and wrote in a single name, Riley Ann Waverly. She signed beneath it, the pen gliding smoothly. The ink didn't tremble. She leaned back, studying the page. "Earned, not expected," she murmured. Then she folded the document, sealed it, and slid it into the lockbox under her bed. Outside, the evening wind pushed softly against the window, rattling it once before settling. She looked toward it and smiled faintly. The first deduction hit Heather's paycheck like a slap she hadn't seen coming. She tore open the envelope in the break room of the real estate office, the smell of burnt coffee and printer ink thick around her. Her name, crisp in block letters, looked as confident as always, until she saw the smaller number below it. The decimal mocked her. She blinked, checked again, then snatched the attached slip. Court-enforced wage garnishment, civil restitution, case number 24, C. So 3-8. Her stomach dropped. Someone in the next cubicle laughed at a meme. A phone buzzed. The copier hummed. Normal office life continued, oblivious to the moment she realized she'd officially been reduced to a defendant with a time card. She stormed to her desk, grabbed her phone, and typed into the court portal, nails hammering the glass. The filing was already processed. Payment plan, automatic, duration, until balance cleared. Heather exhaled sharply, half a growl, half a laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." By noon, she'd called 3 times to the clerk's office, once to Patrick Delaney's firm, and finally, out of desperation, to Riley. Her daughter answered cautiously. "Mom? They're taking it out of my check," Heather hissed. "Every single week. I filed an appeal request." There was silence. Then, gently, "Maybe don't fight it. It's done. Don't you dare take her side. I'm not, Riley said. I'm just saying, maybe this is the part where you stop. Heather hung up before she could finish. 2 weeks later, the appeal notice arrived. 1 page. Denied. Meanwhile, across town, the bookstore bell jingled as Riley wiped dust from a stack of paperbacks. She'd taken a part-time job after classes ended. Cash register, shelving, slow afternoons. The pay was modest, but it was hers. Every Thursday, she brought her grandmother a paper bag of muffins from the cafe next door, warm and still smelling of sugar. They'd sit together in Marlene's little kitchen at Brookwood, where the hum of the refrigerator filled the soft silences. Marlene would listen to Riley talk about customers, the overexcited romance readers, the guy who whispered conspiracy theories by the biographies, and she'd laugh quietly, content just to hear life spoken in the unguarded tone of youth. One evening, as Riley rinsed the mug, she said, "I still think about Mom sometimes." "So do I," Marlene replied. "But thinking doesn't mean returning." Riley nodded, wiping her hands. "I know, I just hope she's okay." "She will be," Marlene said. "After the noise quiets, people start hearing themselves again." By December, Marlene's apartment had become the quiet heart of Brookwood. Twice a week, she hosted small dinners. Nothing fancy, just stews, casseroles, the kind of food that smelled like calm. Susan always came early, claiming she was helping, though mostly she refilled Marlene's wine glass and told stories about her late husband's inability to fold towels. One night, as they cleared the table, Susan handed her a wrapped frame. "Consider this an upgrade from flowers." Marlene smiled, peeling back the paper. Inside was a simple print, black text on white linen. "Grace isn't weakness." Her throat tightened as she traced the words with one fingertip. "You always know what to bring." Susan shrugged. "You earned it." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Marlene sat at her desk again. The framed quote leaned against the lamp, catching the light like truth finally finding its reflection. She opened the lockbox and unfolded the trust papers, the clean signatures, the careful clauses, Riley's name neatly printed beside the word executor. At the bottom, in her own handwriting, she'd written a small note months ago. Earned, not expected. She smiled at that. It still felt right. Across town, Heather stared at her online banking screen, watching another automatic deduction disappear. The silence in her apartment was too heavy, too loud. Her reflection stared back at her through the glass of her dark computer monitor. The outline of someone who'd finally learned what it meant to owe something intangible. She shut the laptop and sat very still. Back at Brookwood, the night was softer. Marlene opened her window just a crack, letting in the winter air. The stars were faint but steady, and the framed quote on the nightstand caught the moonlight. The scent of onions and butter filled the small kitchen at Brookwood. The kind of smell that clings to sweaters and memories alike. Marlene stood at the stove, wooden spoon in hand, stirring a pot of slow-cooked stew that had been simmering since noon. Outside, snow feathered against the window, soft and unhurried. Riley sat on the counter beside the sink, legs swinging, scrolling through her phone until the Wi-Fi lagged and she gave up. "Smells amazing," she said, leaning over the pot. "You always make it better than I remember." "That's because I make it slower now," Marlene said, smiling faintly. "Good things shouldn't be rushed." Riley grinned. "Try telling that to my manager. He times how fast I can alphabetize mystery novels. Maybe he thinks order solves chaos. Then he's never met a bookstore during Christmas." Marlene laughed, really laughed, and Riley looked up, startled by how light it sounded. For once, the room felt entirely free of ghosts. The cornbread finished baking just as the last light faded. Marlene pulled the cast-iron skillet from the oven, the smell of toasted corn and butter spilling out like warmth made tangible. She set it on the trivet Susan had given her last year, shaped like a sunflower. They filled their bowls and sat at the small round table. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of silverware. It wasn't silence born of distance. It was the quiet that comes when words don't have to do the heavy lifting anymore. Halfway through her meal, Riley spoke softly. "Do you think she'll ever say sorry?" Marlene paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. The question hung in the air, gentle but cutting. She set the spoon down. "No," she said. "I don't think she will." Riley nodded, looking down at her bowl. "I figured." Marlene reached across the table, resting her hand over Riley's. "But I didn't do any of this for her apology." Riley's eyes flicked up. "Then why?" "For the same reason I cook now," Marlene said. "Because I can. Because I choose what feeds me and what doesn't." They sat in the glow of the kitchen light for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, forgiveness, inheritance. After the dishes were washed and the stew packed away for leftovers, Marlene disappeared into her bedroom. When she returned, she was holding a box wrapped in faded tissue paper. "This," she said, placing it in front of Riley, "has waited long enough." Riley unwrapped it carefully. Inside was the same porcelain plate set from years ago, the one that had been drenched in water and laughter that wasn't funny. The glaze gleamed now, polished back to life. Riley touched the rim of the top plate. "You kept them?" "Every one," Marlene said. "I couldn't throw them out. They needed cleaning, not replacing." Riley looked at her grandmother, understanding dawning slowly. "You fixed them?" Marlene smiled. "No. I just stopped letting the damage define them." She picked up the top plate and handed it to Riley. "You serve who shows up. That's legacy." Riley blinked hard, her throat tightening. "Grandma." Marlene shook her head gently. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll remember that when someone tries to tell you, love means letting them take more than they give." "I promise," Riley whispered. The clock ticked softly in the background. Outside, the snow thickened, covering the sidewalks in white silence. Riley helped her grandmother pack the dishes back into their box, then lingered by the door, coat half-zipped. "You know," she said, voice careful. "It's weird. It's like she's finally not here anymore." Marlene tilted her head. "Who?" "Mom." Marlene thought about that for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe that's what peace looks like. Not gone. Just quiet." Riley smiled, small and certain. "I'll see you Tuesday? I'll have cornbread waiting." When the door closed behind her, the apartment fell still again. Marlene gathered the plates, now gleaming under the kitchen light, and set one at the table, just one, for herself. She poured a cup of tea and took a slow sip. The warmth curling through her chest like contentment finally finding its place. The ballroom of the Cedar Rapids Civic Center shimmered under soft amber light. Round tables were dressed in white linens, each holding a single glass vase with sprigs of baby's breath. A jazz trio played something low and steady near the stage, their rhythm slow enough for people to sway if they wanted to. Marlene sat at table 7, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She wore a simple navy gown and a silver brooch shaped like a small key, a gift from Susan that morning. The hum of polite laughter rolled around her like distant surf. The event was called the Heart of the Community Dinner, an annual fundraiser for local outreach programs. She had been nominated by Brookwood Commons for her advocacy in elder autonomy, though the words still made her blush. She hadn't fought for recognition, just for room to breathe. Riley sat beside her, camera in hand, her hair pinned back with the kind of care she used to save for birthdays. "You ready?" she whispered. Marlene smiled. "I was ready the day I signed my own name again." The announcer at the podium cleared his throat. And this year's recipient for Community Resilience and Renewal, Mrs. Marlene R. Waverly. Applause rose, gentle but real. Marlene stood, steady as ever, and walked to the stage. No nerves, no pretense, just the quiet sound of heels on polished floor and a few people standing as she passed. When she reached the microphone, she took a moment before speaking, long enough to let the applause fade into something more intimate. "I'm not anyone special," she began. "Just someone who got tired of being disrespected quietly." The line landed like a truth people didn't know they'd been waiting to hear. She continued, her voice calm, unhurried. "Sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't look like a fight. It looks like paperwork. Or saying no. Or cooking for people who actually sit down to eat with you." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind that comes from recognition, not amusement. "I used to think peace came from forgiving the people who hurt you," she said, eyes sweeping the room. "Now I know peace comes from forgiving yourself for letting them." For a moment she saw Susan near the back, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Riley, in the front row, smiled through tears. When the applause began again, it was fuller. Not loud, but standing. People rose to their feet. Not because they were told to, but because something about her steadiness demanded it. The trio began to play again. A slow, tender piece. A few couples drifted to the dance floor. Riley came up to the stage, her small camera in hand. "One picture," she said softly. "Not for posting. Just for us." Marlene nodded and stood with her granddaughter as the flash went off, a single burst of light that caught them both mid-laugh. Later, when the plates were cleared and the music softened further, Marlene found herself at a corner table with a cup of chamomile tea. Around her, people talked about plans and donations and next year's themes. She tuned them out, her attention caught by the way the light from the chandelier danced across the tea's surface. Susan joined her for a moment, her corsage slightly crooked. "You did it," she said, voice hushed. "You really did it." Marlene smiled faintly. "It's quieter than I expected." "Quiet's a luxury," Susan said. "It is," Marlene agreed. "One I can finally afford." They sat for a while longer, watching people dance. The music swelled, soft and romantic, and the scent of vanilla and candle wax filled the room. Riley waved from across the hall, mouthing, "Love you." Marlene raised her teacup slightly, the closest she'd ever come to a toast. Outside the tall windows, snow was falling again, not the heavy kind, but light, easy flakes that seemed to dissolve before they touched the ground. Heather was nowhere near. No emails, no calls, no noise, just absence, clean, final, like a page turned all the way to its end. Marlene took a long sip of tea, the warmth wrapping through her chest like forgiveness that didn't need permission. She set the cup down gently, her reflection catching faintly in the porcelain glaze. There were no spilled pitchers, no raised voices, no debts left unpaid. Only the soft hum of music, the laughter of people she trusted, and the stillness she'd built herself, one boundary at a time. She smiled, not to anyone in particular, but to the memory that started it all. That cold, soaked pancake, and the laughter that had echoed too loudly over it. Her voice came out in a whisper, almost amused, almost prayerful. "My daughter poured water on my food laughing. Her next meal came with a bill." She let the words settle into the hum of the room, then finished her tea in silence. And for the first time, it felt like the story was full.